It's the longest professional sporting event in the world. 45,000 miles through the toughest sailing conditions on the planet. Raced by 7 teams in identical boats, the only speed advantage is paid for with effort, dedication, and a relentless will to win. Now in its 13th edition, there will be more miles to cover in the cold, harsh southern latitudes than any previous race, making it quite possibly the hardest ever to win.
This month on Mainsail, we're in Melbourne, Australia, catching up with the Volvo Ocean Race fleet as it finishes the first grueling Southern Ocean leg of the race.
Since 1973, race crews have been taking on the world's oceans in what is widely considered the toughest sailing challenge of them all. Currently in its 13th edition, the Volvo Ocean Race has a well-earned reputation. It's one of our sport's most formidable challenges, and this time around, it could be even harder to win than ever.
This month on Mainsail, we've come here to Melbourne, Australia, to catch up with the Volvo fleet as they race around the Southern Ocean, and to check in with the crews as they touch down after one of the longest legs in the race.
On arrival here in Australia, the crews will have completed 15,000 miles of offshore sailing.
It's a big mix of emotions and a real test, I think, both mentally and physically on your body and on your team.
It's full on the whole time, and you're surfing down huge waves at big speeds with big winds, and a mistake is going to cost you.
It's like constantly wet, waves coming over on deck, and pretty much every single time you're coming up, you've got your life jacket on, you're clipping on, you know that waves can wash you off at any stage.
The race started back in October of last year, as the fleet left the Mediterranean port of Alicante in Spain and headed out through the Straits of Gibraltar to Lisbon, Portugal. This opening leg at just 1,500 miles was a comparative sprint for the fleet of 7 boats. But with early form, bragging rights and valuable points at stake, the racing was fierce. As expected, it was a nip and tuck affair. But taking the vital leg 1 win was Charlie Enright's Vestas 11th hour racing.
Incredibly motivating for the team, very rewarding for us, and showed everybody that we could do it, and we're a race-winning team. Couldn't imagine a better start really to the race.
From Lisbon, 7,000 miles of the grueling Atlantic Ocean lay between the teams and their Leg 2 destination of Cape Town, South Africa. After a flurry of initial lead changes, Dongfeng Racing established a dominant position at the front of the fleet. With 3,000 miles to go, though, the lead became hard to hold on to. Multiple changes up front saw the fleet jostling for position before 1,000 miles from home, Xabi Fernandez Mapfre took the initiative. It was a lead they'd keep all the way to Cape Town, winning leg 2 by just under 3 hours.
We were in the fight the whole leg, behind Dongfeng most of it, to be honest, and then we managed to pass them and win the leg. It was a good moment for us, important, and give us a lot of confidence that a lot of the things we're doing are good.
In Cape Town, 2 legs in, Xabi Fernandez Mapfre were looking good at the top of the leaderboard. But they still had 9 legs to go. The next, leg 3, of course, bringing them to Melbourne, Australia.
So why catch up with the fleet so early on in the race? Well, we've come here to this finish because it's a stage that's not been in the race for over a decade. And for some of the fleet, it could well be the toughest stage of all.
At 6,500 miles, leg 3 isn't the longest section. In fact, it's the 3rd longest this time around. But for many, it's definitely going to be the hardest. It's the first time in this race that the fleet will be racing in the ferocious conditions of the brutal Southern Ocean. But it's also the first leg of 3 legs in this edition with double points on offer. After the initial lead changes of the opening 2 days, the fleet charged full speed into the gruesome Southern Ocean, as a low-pressure system battered the boats with gusts of up to 60 knots. there were hazardous conditions above and below deck. It was one of the biggest storms a Volvo fleet had raced through in the past few editions. The powerful conditions took their toll on equipment and crew.
Very demanding conditions, always fast, always wet. Everyone's pretty tired. You can see sometimes the tiredness affects people a bit.
Team Akzo Nobel were seriously hampered by severe damage to their mast track after this brutal crash jibe.
We had a jibe on in some pretty hard conditions, I guess 35 knots, 40, and had a bad one.
As racing settled, the front of the fleet was dominated by just Dongfeng and Mapfre, with the Chinese boat taking charge for the moment. But it was extremely close.
After 1 week of race, we are still seeing each other by day and also by night.
But 10 days out of Cape Town, while negotiating the ice gate, a limit imposed by the organisers to keep the fleet away from the icebergs, it was again Mapfre that, after multiple exhausting manoeuvres, inched in front.
First ice exclusion zone, we had to do almost around 30 jibes, and this morning as well, to clear up the Australian safety zone, we had to do another 10 or 12.
Having relinquished the lead, Dongfeng's problems were then compounded by hydraulic equipment failure, costing them vital miles as the chasing fleet made up ground.
So basically the port keel ram, which pushes the keel from side to side, where it attaches to the actual boat, and the whole fitting is cracked. And it's a bit of a mess at the moment.
As predicted, it's been a hard-fought leg 3. With the fleet now just a few miles from the finish line here in Melbourne. In part 2, we'll be heading out to see if Mapfre held on to that lead, and we'll be talking to some of the fleet's first-timers about racing in the unforgiving Southern Ocean. But before then, let's take a look at what else has been going on in the sailing world this month.
The 40-metre Maxi Trimaran Spindrift 2 set out from Brest in France to attempt the Jules Verne Trophy, the fastest lap of the planet. But as skipper Jan Guichard and his crew were about to cross the start line, she was dismasted, bringing to an end the hope of any new record this season. At the first ever leg of the Superfoiler Grand Prix in Adelaide, Australia, 3 America's Cup stars, Nathan Utteridge, Ian Jensen and Glenn Ashby, showed their superiority by claiming victory in all 7 races, taking maximum points. This month on Mainsail, we're in Melbourne, Australia, waiting for the fleet of the Volvo Ocean Race to finish one of the toughest, longest legs in this edition of the race. Leg 3, a leg that hasn't been included in the Volvo for over a decade.
This time around though, all the boats seem to have negotiated the fierce Southern Ocean storms in good shape. And with just a few miles to go to the finish, we're heading out to see who's going to be celebrating at the end of leg 3.
After 14 days of flat-out racing in some of the most relentless and challenging sailing conditions known to man, Mapfre crossed the finish line in first place for the second time in 3 legs.
That's a big win for the big red boat. Their second leg victory, and this one's double points. For these guys, that's massive.
With 4 previous Volvo Ocean races to his name, skipper Xavi Fernandez is one of the most experienced leaders in the fleet, and he's attempting to achieve the first ever overall Volvo Ocean race win for a team from his native country of Spain.
Well, it's been very intense. It's been a 14 days race, and 10 of them have been super windy, wet, cold, and a massive fight with Dongfeng, right? And they've been leading most of the time, and our plan was just to keep it tight and just wait for the opportunity, so it's been very good.
Celebrations too for Sophie Sizik. It's a massive day for her, sailing into her home port in first place ahead of the rest of the Volvo fleet.
I think coming into Melbourne's extra special, but yeah, coming in first place after a leg like that is just something you can't really explain. It's just unbelievable. We left Cape Town in 40 knots upwind. It was, you know, from the start it was hard, and yeah, we all pushed the whole entire time. It was just absolutely relentless. I think I took my jacket off maybe once.
So after 6,000 miles and 14 days of sailing, Matt Freed take a commanding win here in Melbourne. Just under 100 miles behind them, having led the leg for much of the 2 weeks at sea, it was Charles Caudrelier's Dongfeng race team who came in second. Limping home with that damaged keel ram, they'd held off a strong challenge from Vestas 11th Hour Racing, and there was only 17 miles in it.
That's another solid result in this edition. Charles Caudrelier's got to be happy with that. Second into Melbourne, it's job well done for the Chinese team.
If you are not on the podium on this double point leg, it's really difficult. So, you know, we need to find a way to lead the race until the end, because we are very good to start fast, to lead the race, but we are not very good finisher. We have to find a solution.
Completing the top three into Melbourne, the youngest skipper of the race, Charlie Enright, finished third with Vestas 11th Hour Racing. With the double point scenario of leg 3, that's a big finish for the American team. As the top three break away on the leaderboard, Vestas sits third on equal points with Dongfeng. For the rest of the fleet into Melbourne, the 8-time race veteran via Becking's Team Brunel took 4th place, ahead of Scallywag, Turn the Tide on Plastic and Team AkzoNobel.
6 months ago here at Mainsail, we previewed this edition of the Volvo Ocean Race and looked at how 3 sailors in particular would have been anticipating this leg with much apprehension.
Just 4 months before the start of the Volvo Ocean Race, Pete Burling, Blair Tuke and Carl Langford were all busy fighting it out in the high-speed world of the 35th America's Cup. While the trophy was still on its victory lap of New Zealand, the trio were all quick to announce their involvement in the Volvo.
I guess the big differences are that here you don't have the big support staff behind you. If you break something on the boat, you're the guy that's got to fix it, and you just got to keep going day after day, whereas the America's Cup, it's a bit more structured, I would say, and you know, you kind of get into a nice routine for 2 or 3 years, you know, sailing each day and developing, whereas this, it's just kind of all on, thrown at you, and you're kind of in the deep end.
For Kiwis Pete Burling and Blair Tuke, the Volvo represents a similar challenge, but it also sees them competing against each other for the first time. In 2016, the pair achieved their first Olympic gold medal together, sailing in the 49er class. Then, 2017 came victory in the America's Cup. Both of these ambitious young sailors are now hoping to complete an unprecedented treble by winning the Volvo Ocean Race. But neither of these accomplished inshore sailors have offshore experience, so this leg has represented a huge milestone for them both.
For me, it felt like the race had started proper when we were leaving Cape Town, and a few nerves there, just because you were going to something you'd never been to before. That was cool. It was good to have that feeling, and once you got on the water and got going, it was all good. And pushing the boat in the Southern Ocean is like nothing else. Just surfing down these waves, water everywhere, albatross flying around. It's just an amazing feeling, and it's certainly right up there with all the other types of sailing I've done.
For myself, I feel like I'm learning an incredible amount every leg, and this is really my first proper offshore experience. I think unless you go offshore and you spend more than 15 days on the boat, and you actually get in tough conditions where it just carries on for more than 24 hours, you don't really get to appreciate what it's like.
To do the Volvo Ocean Race, to be down deep in the Southern Ocean, is very different than racing at the Olympics or in Bermuda at the America's Cup. Obviously this race has got a huge mental, sort of physical battle that you have to go through. This is just a real endurance factor, which I'm loving.
One innovation for this edition has been that the media guys on board have been flying drones. How's that gone on your boat?
Yeah, they get some absolutely amazing shots off the drones. It's something that it gives you a different perspective. You're obviously out there in the middle of nowhere, and you can never really get the camera angles that they can get with the drone, and you get some amazing shots, especially when you fly the drone nice and close to the boat.
The footage has really shown us a view that we've never seen before. And can you imagine trying to pilot a drone off the back of a 65-foot racing machine? If you want to see more, there's a great insight on the sailing pages at CNN Online.
Welcome back to Mainsail. We're in Melbourne, where leg 3 of the Round the World Volvo Ocean Race has just finished.
As we've already seen, it was Spanish team Mapfre that led the fleet across the line to scoop those valuable maximum points in this double point leg of the race.
Finishing this leg in 6th place was Turn the Tide on Plastic, skippered by Dika Farry, who is now on her 5th lap of the planet. The accomplished British offshore sailor is leading the youngest crew in this edition, and as a team that's taking full advantage of the new heavily incentivised mixed crew rules.
To watch these sailors develop before my eyes has been so cool. I am actually getting a real buzz out of that. We're only 3 legs in and they are completely different people to the people I set off with in Alicante. This environment now where there's mixed teams, it's a much more inclusive group, whereas before it was a them and us, and I didn't feel the integration at all.
Leg 3 has seen women racing on all of the 7 boats, and just 1/3 of the way into the race, mixed crews have already very much become the norm.
When we step on board and we go sailing, yeah, we're one team, we're one crew, we're one group of people just trying to achieve the same goal.
It's a huge step forward. I mean, if it wasn't for this rule, we probably wouldn't be here. And not only that, we're here and we're mixing in with the guys and their experience, and we're learning from them. And again, I'm on a boat that's winning, so you know the level is just so much higher. And it's awesome that the guys took it on as well. You know, without them and their support, we wouldn't be here.
The stopover here in Melbourne is a short one. After just a week ashore, the teams head out again, initially east, then north out across the Coral Sea towards Asia and the bustling city of Hong Kong.
It's a tricky leg, riding the dwindling southern storms north before the southeasterly trade winds kick in. But there's plenty of land to contend with. All of those idyllic South Pacific islands messing with the weather. There's the doldrums of the equatorial region. And if that's not enough, January is of course cyclone season in this part of the Pacific. This is the first time the race has run this course, so there's little to go on, which means this leg 4 is probably going to be a particularly sleepless one for each of the team's navigators.
It's going to be a lot of those sort of more tactical and strategic challenges, and a lot more navigational challenges as well. There's lots of different weather and lots of things to think about.
There will be long bits of it that's going to be a real speed contest, just a drag race. And that's when everyone needs to be fit and everything needs to work, and you need to push the boat over 100% non-stop. And then to be able to make those right tactical decisions here in this area, and to give also our navigator Jules enough time to think and not to be too tired. I mean, that balance is the beauty of the sport and the beauty of offshore sailing.
With several crew changes throughout the fleet, one notable leg 4 addition was to Charles Caudrelier's Dongfeng race team. An injured Pascal Bedagori was replaced by one-time Volvo winning skipper, French offshore legend, Franck Camas.
Franck is a winner and he has won this race, and when he's on board I'm very confident. So it's the best choice we could have. We are lucky that he's available at the last minute.
The charge north to Hong Kong began on the 2nd of January, in stunning sailing conditions that saw race leaders Mapfre lead from the gun. The boat settled into a 20-knot sprint through the Tasman Sea to the southern tip of mainland Australia, led by Mapfre until the turn north, where tactics and routing began to play a key role. The race north up the eastern coast of Australia saw 4 different boats leading the fleet, before turning northeast towards the shifty winds and stressful light airs of the doldrums, where boat speeds dropped dramatically and nerves became frayed. In the hunt for the northeasterly trade winds, Team Scallywag seemed to be struggling. With the rest of the fleet suddenly caught up in confused weather, David Witt seized an opportunity and struck out for home, turning northwest on a straight-line run to his home port of Hong Kong. Taking the lead with over 2,000 miles of racing to go, Scallywag sailed hard. But even in relatively moderate 20-knot conditions, they were suddenly served a very stark reminder of how dangerous offshore sailing can be. In just shorts and t-shirt, unclipped and void of a life jacket, crew member Alex Goff went over the side.
Yeah, we're going to use the engine to slow down to get in. Okay, engine on, engine on. Show me the line. Help, help.
Just 7 minutes later, he was back on board.
Only reason we found you is put your arm in the air. Okay?
One of those days where it's not actually that rough, but it's kind of still going pretty quick. So yeah, I was just pretty stupid, and luckily the boys were onto it.
Despite the man overboard, Scallywag hung on to take leg 4 victory, while Dongfeng came in second, just 3 hours behind. Team Akzo completed the podium. Vestas 11th Hour Racing, however, retired from this leg. They were involved in a collision with a fishing vessel 30 miles from Hong Kong that resulted in a tragic fatality of a crew member of the fishing vessel. There is an ongoing investigation into the incident. So after leg 4, Matt Freed topped the leaderboard with Dongfeng Race Team in second, 4 points behind. Vestas 11th Hour Racing missed out on points in this leg. Urgent repairs to their boat means they will also not compete in the next leg. For the rest of the Volvo fleet, the pace continues to be relentless. Now halfway through the race, leg 6 is already underway. A tense 6,000-mile course back into the southern hemisphere to Auckland, New Zealand. For all of these teams, there are many more challenging and grueling situations to tackle before a winner to this incredibly tough race is finally crowned in June.